so today is about evolution and genetics. So remember that evolution is change over time. And I told you something very specific the other day about evolution. What evolves? Who remembers? What evolves? Do we evolve as an individual?
No, species.
So as a population. Thank you. Okay, we evolve as a population. So evolution requires 4 things. Okay, and the first of these is variation. So variation is the differences between individuals in a species. And we talked about this briefly the other day. I pulled up a picture of watermelons, of the human population, and do they all look the same? No, okay? So variation is the differences between individuals in a species. So evolution acts on variation that is already present in a population, okay? So you see up here some ladybugs. Do they all look the same? No. What do you notice that's different? Okay, different spots. Do the spots, what about the spots that they're different? Some have more, some have less, and they're in different places. What else? Okay, different sizes. Okay, so they're found in different spots, different sizes, and I can't hear you.
If you look on it, one has a white dot on the neck, and one doesn't.
They all have one big pot. Well, the one's missing one dot.
The one below it is missing a dot.
Okay, so those are some things that we see that are different. The second of the 4 things that evolution requires is inheritance. Okay, so inheritance are the traits that result in greater fitness that can be passed on to the offspring. Because remember we said, does everyone survive? No. Okay, the ones that are best adapted or suited for their environment are the ones that will survive and reproduce. So inheritance is the traits that result in the greater fitness can be passed on to offspring. Number 3 is time. So evolution requires time, and what we mean by time is that many, many generations must pass. We don't evolve in a day or a week or a month, okay, or a year. Many, many generations have to pass. And then last, evolution requires selection. And what we mean by selection is that some individuals have greater fitness than others, and those that have that greater fitness are the ones that will survive and reproduce. And we looked at this the other day. We saw this same image with the green and brown beetles, and what happens throughout this image? The green beetles get eaten because why? They stand out. Okay, they don't blend into the tree bark. And so then over time, what happens? The brown beetles are the ones that reproduce. Okay, so therefore, over time, we're going to see many more brown beetles. So now that we know the 4 things that evolution requires, we can now understand how evolution works better than Darwin ever could. We know genes are the units of heredity. We talked about this in our genetics unit, okay? And they are what explain genetic variation. So in the end, if there's different DNA, it's going to code for a different protein, and therefore lead to a different trait. So looking up here takes us back to genetics. You've got straight fur and curly fur, and you notice what in the DNA sequence? There's only one letter that's different. And that one letter is essentially going to code for a different what? A different what? Amino acid, which can in turn lead to a different protein, okay? So genetic variation is studied at the population level. And this is important, okay? So this brings back what I said, and we just mentioned at the very beginning, that populations are what evolve, not an individual. So in genetic terms, evolution is any change in the relative frequency of alleles in a population. So if you look here, this gives us our sample population. So we've got homozygous black, homozygous brown, talking about mice, and then we have heterozygous black. Who remembers what kind of dominance this is? So if you have black and brown and your heterozygote is still black, complete dominance, right? Just the very first type that we ever talked about, okay? Because we don't see a mixture and we don't see both colors showing through. Nicely done. So over here, that shows us our sample population. And then if you look over here, this is just our frequency of alleles. So the possibility of the alleles for brown fur and the possibility of alleles for black fur. So down here, you can't see this, but I will read it to you. It says the relative frequency of an allele is the number of times that it occurs as a percentage of the total number of alleles in the gene pool. But where does genetic variation come from? What have we talked about with variation? That takes us back to meiosis. Where can we get genetic variation from? Sexual reproduction. Mutations. Crossing over, very good. Non-disjunction. One more. We said that one. There's two names for it. What's it called if something happens by chance? Random. Random what? Assortment. Random assortment. Nicely done. Okay. So it's called random or independent assortment. Nice job, y'all. So we are going to talk about two of them. First being mutations. And the second, gene shuffling, okay? So up here, you see 3 of the 5 that we just mentioned. So mutations are what? Changes in the genetic code, changes in the DNA sequence, okay? So when we're talking about mutations, it doesn't always affect the phenotype. Second, we have gene shuffling during meiosis, and this involves 2 of the things we mentioned. The first being crossing over, Who remembers what crossing over is?
Like for, one side from the change from
Chromatids also.
Okay, so they're essentially swapping genetic information, right? So the chromatids from each chromosome cross over and swap genetic info. Okay, and then second is independent assortment, also known as random assortment. So this also creates new combinations because it's just happening by chance. So up here, we've talked about several types of mutations. What were some of them that we talked about? Deletion.
That would be nice.
That is not wrong. You're going back to karyotyping now. So what were the, when we actually talked about mutations themselves, what were they? Insertion. And if I'm not here, who comes? A substitution, so substitution, nicely done, okay? And insertion and deletion are known as what? What do you put a picture in? A frame. Friendship, yes, I was trying to, you know, like, boom.
You should have put into a picture or something to do like
Alright.
that.
Sorry.
Try to do the YMCA.
What back? Getting out. All right. So up here, sometimes a mutation will not affect the phenotype because many codons code for the same amino acid. And we saw that when we did,
We did,
What?
you don't remember?
we did this.
What did you say or you said you're not? The codon charts, yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Codon charts. So remember that there were several sequences, right? Several codons that can code for the same amino acid. So that in turn is why it sometimes does not always affect the phenotype. All right, Pokemon fans. Funny that y'all brought that up today.
That's why I brought you.
Oh, that's why. All right. So once again, remember that it's populations that evolve, not individuals. Okay. Sometimes you will see this, sometimes you won't, but this is super important to know. Okay. So these guys, they don't evolve, but together they can.
So what if you're like.
Pikachu.
No, the first one? First one's Pichu, then it's Pikachu, then it's right.
All right. So natural selection, which we talked about the other day, is not the only source of evolution. So genetic drift, and you're going to have an ed puzzle on this today, is the random change in allele frequency due to small population size. And this is also known as the bottleneck effect. So for example, what do you see happening in that picture?
Man is stealing all the green loads that you can see. Random. What are you talking about? You can be just pushing all the buttons.
Okay, so when you're walking, okay, sometimes you look at the ground, but a lot of times you're looking in front of you, right? So sometimes you don't even know you're stepping on something, right? So is he intentionally picking a color to step on?
Yeah.
Possibly, yes.
I did the other day. Maybe. We don't know.
You did?
I went to go for my water. I just saw one run along the wall.
Oh.
I mean, sometimes.
You might have something
All right.
against certain colored bugs.
But-
Maybe they kill the parents.
Avery, is he intentionally picking a color? No, he is not. Okay,
She-
so this,
Yeah, how do you know it's not a she? How do you know it's assume it's gender?
It's a
Guys,
guy.
2020, you can't do
I
that.
said, how does.
All right.
No, not that particular.
so the population of beetles is small, A catastrophic event kills off most of the green beetles, obviously happening by chance. So now there is a greater frequency of the brown allele than there was before, and this is due to genetic drift. Next, I'm going to mention what's known as the founder effect. Okay, this is an example of the bottleneck effect. So what we just saw with genetic drift. So a small group of individuals starts a new population with a different allele frequency from the original. So you see up here, yellow and red, okay? And then this one red beetle starts a new population. So now what is going to be over here? The red, okay? Because that is going to be the higher allele frequency in that population. So we talked about the 4 things that are required for evolution to occur, which are what? Back to the beginning. The 4 things we need. Variation.
Variation, inheritance, time, and selection.
Variation, inheritance, time, and selection. Those are 4 things we need for evolution to occur.
Can you say those one more time?
So when will evolution not occur? Okay, the Hardy-Weinberg principle states that allele frequencies in a population will remain constant if and only if the following conditions are met. So the first of these, mating is random. Okay, does this typically happen with humans? No. Okay. Second, population is very large. So genetic drift can't occur because we said genetic drift occurs in what kind of population? Small. There is no movement into or out of the population. There are no mutations, and there is no natural selection. So let's go back. When will evolution not occur? When mating is random, the population is large, no movement in or out, no mutations, and no natural selection. And last, but very not least, is coevolution. So coevolution, think back to co-dominance, think of a co-teacher, okay? So certain species that depend on each other can co-evolve. So this occurs when the evolution of one species affects the evolution of another. So for example, okay, we have these bell kind of shaped flowers, and you have a what? A hummingbird, right? And hummingbirds have those long, narrow beaks. So this allows coevolution because they kind of rely on one another.